is the one and only Jimmy Dore, who joins us now, host of the legendary Jimmy Dore Show. Jimmy, let's start with a very somber matter indeed. The whole world has now seen the horrific body cam footage of the savage clubbing to death of Tyree Nichols in Memphis, Tennessee. The police not just killing him, but leaving him there to die slowly. The other services that turned up after the fact, standing around, laughing, joking, smoking, and so on. It's possibly the worst movie out of America that wasn't made by Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, it's, policing, I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but certainly in America, it's broken, and it's been broken for a long time. And they fill our policing with ex-military people too, which is another bad thing. And there's lots of ways to reform the police in the United States, but the oligarchy doesn't want it. So let's remember what the police are there. They're not really there to keep you safe. They're there to protect the property of the oligarchies. And so even though these policemen were all African American, they're still saying that this was, because of systemic racism inside the policing in America. I think police in America are just, they recruit the wrong people. They're out of control maniacs. They're hopped up on steroids. They don't live in the neighborhoods that they police in. So they don't see the citizenry in America as someone that they're supposed to serve. They see them as the enemy. And so, like, for instance, in Los Angeles, all the cops live 30 miles outside of the city, and then they drive into the city to police us like they're animals. So that's what happens. And there's really so we did a whole year of protests in the United States. It was the biggest protest in the history of our country. And what the Democrats did after that year of protests was they invented another police department, and they funded it with $2 billion. And then they gave many more millions of dollars to the police. It was the exact opposite of what their voters wanted them to do. So again, we live in an oligarchy. That's why there will be no police reform, because the police serve the oligarchs. It's the same problem with everything. It's why we don't have health care in America, the richest country in the world. It's why the richest country in the world, half of the people here are poor or low income. It's 80% of workers live paycheck to paycheck in the richest country in the world, because people don't realize that the United States, see, people in America think the United States is just regular corrupt. They don't understand that it's 100% corrupt, which is why we can send $100 billion to Nazis in Ukraine right in our faces, when we won't send $100 billion to the United States so that we can fix homelessness or give people health care or a living wage. And the people see that this is happening now, slowly starting to see. Whether they will get joined together and rise up, they need a leader to bring people together. And what's starting to happen in America is people on the left and the right are starting to see that they share a common interest. And that's what actually scares the oligarchy the most. And so if that happens, then maybe we can have some reform of the police. If that happens, maybe we can have healthcare in America. If that happens, maybe we can end these murderous wars for fossil fuels and hegemony, and maybe we can start investing in our own country. We don't have, we were supposed to get high-speed trains here during the first economic collapse in 2008. They were supposed to have high-speed trains all over America. They never built one. We don't have anything in the United States that other countries have. We don't have health care. We don't have transportation. We don't have living wage. We have education system that bankrupts you. And it's because our country is completely 100% bought by corporations, right? So we're living in a fascist state. And the trick they play is the Democrats and the Democrat liberal corporate-owned media, they try to trick you into thinking one party is fascist and one party isn't. So it keeps you inside that system thinking someone's actually fighting for you. There was nobody fighting for you inside the government of the United States. And that's what just got revealed when the lefty squad completely rolled over and became war pigs. So if you're a lefty, you're supposed to at least be against war. They're the biggest war pigs in the world, and they'll never stand up against the establishment to stick up for the people who got them there. So I know that's a long answer, and I know it started with what's wrong with policing in America, but what's wrong with policing in America is a symptom of what's wrong with America. America is that we live in a 100% completely corrupt country where the gears of the government only work if it's lubricated with corruption, which is why we can send $100 billion at the snap of a finger to the most corrupt country in Europe, while we won't send $100 billion to fix homelessness in America.
Well, they do need a leader, and that leader needs to have a hat, Jimmy, but I'll not press you on that point this time, at least. The characteristics of fascism are many, but of course, one of them is that you have a rubber stamp parliament with one party in it. And that was proved all over again this week, wasn't it? The Republicans had run on a ticket that criticized this huge largesse being given to the most corrupt country in Europe. But when push came to shove, they have now agreed to send the very same money. So we have absolute bipartisanship in stuffing the mouths of the oligarchs in Ukraine, as long as they kick enough of it back to the United States through the military-industrial complex and the politicians themselves. Am I right?
Of course, you're 100% right. And that's why people hate me from both parties in America. I get a lot of vitriol, especially from the Democrats, because I keep pointing out that the Democrats aren't different than the Republicans, that on all the major issues, they serve the same people. Ralph Nader famously said the only difference between a Democrat and Republican is the speed at which their knee hits the ground when a donor walks in the room. And so the way we do politics in America is we only have two parties that are viable, and they're both bought and paid for by the same people. So it's just, I don't know if you ever heard of the Harlem Globetrotters, but they're a basketball team in the United States, and they play every game against the Washington Generals, and they always beat them. And it's because they're being paid by the same guy. It's a show. And that's what's happening in the United States. And when I tell people that the Democrats aren't a lesser or two evil, they say I'm enabling fascists. Joe Biden and the Democrats are bigger fascists than Trump ever even tried to be. They just crushed a railroad strike. So railroad workers don't get sick leave in the United States. Railroad workers, the glue that holds our economy together, they won't even give those people sick pay. That's how corrupted our whole culture and system is over here. And so they were going to go on strike, and they would have got it. They would have got it like that. Joe Biden and the Democrats, after just running an election saying you have to vote for us because we're the ones who are going to protect democracy and the Republicans are fascists, they immediately committed fascism and instituted a strike break. They broke that strike, passed a law that they had to accept the contract or it was illegal. So that's what the Democrats are. They're actually in bed with big business to crush workers. That's the definition of fascism. And I want to beat around the bush. Joe Biden and the Democrats are fascist. We live in a fascist country. And the idea that Joe Biden and the Democrats are fighting fascism is a narrative the Democrat and the corporate media wants you to believe. They are fascists, and the Democrats are not a lesser of two evil. They are a greater of two evils. If Trump right now was saber rattling and trying to starting wars with two nuclear powers, which is what Joe Biden's doing, people would be screaming bloody murder with their hair on fire. But because the corporate news media owned by the military-industrial complex says it's okay, and Joe Biden's supposed to not be crazy like Trump, then nobody cares. They literally get people to go along with the Ukraine war as if Putin is some kind of a madman, and we're not. We're occupying a third of Syria right now. And why are we occupying it? For the oil. Who said that? The president of the United States admitted that our foreign policy is based on stealing other countries' fossil fuels, which is what we're doing right now. And somehow in America, everybody just thinks Putin's bad and Ukraine's bad. They have no idea that America, the United States government and their military are the world's terrorists.
Now, there is one man who's beginning to stand out as a difference, and it's the man that you just mentioned. The man that we were told was so crazy, he might start the Third World War, and therefore we better elect our grandpa, Joe Biden, in order to avert it. He said this week, first it's the tanks, then it's the nukes. He said this week that we are heading inexorably, he didn't use that word, he doesn't use big words, he said we were heading into a disaster. Are his supporters listening to him? If so, that's at least 70 million people we've got on our side in the anti-war cause, isn't it?
I would, that would be nice if that was true, but of course it's not, right? So most Republicans are on board, just like most Democrats are on board for war, and they always will be. So the weird thing is that there used to be token opposition to war in the United States from the left, from the far left. There is no far left in America anymore. They're not. The Democratic Party is a right-wing party, as is the Republican Party. The odd thing is the only people that actually try to do something and stand up against war has been the far right wing. So it used to be the far right wing and the far left wing would oppose war and imperialism, but now it's just the far right wing. And Donald Trump was way less of a warmonger than Joe Biden and Barack Obama, that's for sure, and George Bush. And let's remember that Barack Obama was not a departure from George Bush. He was a continuation of that same policy. And why was he allowed to become president? Because he serves that same oligarchy and corporatocracy. His entire cabinet, Barack Obama's entire cabinet, WikiLeaks revealed, was chosen by Citibank already. So when Barack Obama became president, he didn't end those wars, and he took us from 2 wars to 7. He dropped more bombs than George Bush. He deported more Hispanics than twice as many as Donald Trump. He built the cages that they were putting immigrants in. So Barack Obama he kicked 5.1 million families out of their homes while he made sure the bankers got their bonuses. So this idea that the Democrats and Republicans are different, they're not. They actually serve the exact same people, which is why we're living in the country we live in right now. And I don't have any hope for it getting better unless people get in the streets. What is starting to happen is Amazon, there's a man named Christian Smalls who organized Amazon workers at a fulfillment center in New York City in a borough called Staten Island. Now, Staten Island is mostly white, and the people there are Trump voters. And so there was a black guy who came along, organized Trump voters in a union against Amazon. And so when people say we have to organize along class lines, that's what it means. It means organizing with Trump voters. But Democrats will never do that because the people who own them want to keep us divided and keep pretending that my enemy is my neighbor in America. My neighbor is not my enemy. My enemy is the oligarchs that control both parties, but they want me to hate my neighbor because of the economic pain we're feeling because the oligarchy did a controlled demolition of our economy during COVID, which we all know now came with zero science. And they want me to be angry at my neighbor because of the pain I'm feeling because my neighbor wouldn't take a vaccine that never worked the way they said it did in the first place. Well, I'm not going to hate my neighbor. I'm going to join with my neighbor, just like Christian Smalls did with Amazon, and I'm going to join against the oligarchy, and that's the only way to beat these guys.
Now, the congressional head of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the new guy, a Republican, has endorsed the view of the American general who said this week that within 2 years, the US will be at war with China. Did that cause any waves in the US? Or are people just going quietly into these good nights?
People are going quietly. It didn't raise. No one. It's only a story if the corporate news decides it's a story. So the corporate news decided it wasn't a story. And that's it. We only have 6 media companies in America. That's another reason why the Democrats are not the lesser of two evil. When I was young, we used to have 50 giant media companies in America, right? That's still consolidated, but we had 50 giant media companies. When Bill Clinton became president in 1996, he got rid of all the regulations. And so now they've consolidated the media power. There's only 6 media companies in the entire country. And so if you want to be a journalist, you have to work for one of the 6 oligarch corporations, and they control everything, as Chomsky taught us, with their 5 filters of propaganda. The first one is ownership. So there's nowhere to get that information that general said, or if you get that information, there's nobody to put it in context. The person who they have on the corporate news in America to tell you what what that general meant when he said that? They'll bring on a guy from a weapons manufacturing company, somebody from Raytheon or Boeing. They'll bring on an ex-general who's working to sell more weapons to try to tell you what that guy said. That means it's good. We have to go to war with China. We have to do this. And they always say it's because we're defending democracy. What they're defending is their American hegemony, imperialism, and these are all wars for economic and fossil fuels. What's happening right now in Europe? Russia was supplying 30-40% of the energy to Europe. We Americans wanted some of that, and so now America all of a sudden is selling more liquefied natural gas to Europe as they blow up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So I don't know. They do it right out in the open, as Chris Hedges says. Now they just lie, cheat, and steal right out in the open, and nobody does anything. Can people not? And it's weird to me that the people in Europe are putting up with this or Ukraine thing as if anybody gives a shit about the people in Ukraine, because they don't. What they want to do is get those people slaughtered in a proxy war for American hegemony. And you're a moron if you think that the United States is sending $100 billion in arms to a country because we care about the people. Look how much we cared about the Iraq people. Look how much we cared about the Libyan people. Look how much we cared about the Syrian people. Look how much we care about the Yemen people. Look how much we care about the Somalian people. We don't care about, and look about Afghanistan. 20 years we tortured those people. We didn't even know who the bad guys or the good guys were over there, as the Afghanistan papers revealed. We're the criminals. The United States are the terrorists, and Europe, for going along with them, are cowards.
Yeah, cowards and fools. Lastly, and it's not something we expected to be talking about tonight because it is literally becoming more clear by the minute. But it seems clear enough, certainly for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times to deliver an ex cathedra verdict on it, that the attacks on Iran last night were mounted by Israel, which means, of course, they were paid for by the United States. The armaments that were used were likely supplied by the United States. If true, would this be Israel acting on its own, of its own volition, or is this a deliberate move to open yet another war front by the U.S. administration?
So, yes, the United States has wanted to overthrow the government in Iran for a while. And that's why in the corporate media, so whenever the United States wants to go do a coup and overthrow a government, what you see in the corporate media in the United States is how oppressed their people are. So that's what we've been seeing right away, is that the Iranian women want freedom, and they want to take off their headscarves and all that stuff, and they want freedom. And so we're supposed to all be, and so we're being flooded with these stories of courageous women standing up against the regime in Iran. And as soon as you see that, of course, all the morons in America, they believe it. They take it at face value that, we got to go help these people. But of course they do that because the United States, as an economic hegemon, wants to do that. They want to do it to help Israel. They want to do it for their own good. The United States is the word. So General Wesley Clark famously said on a show called Democracy Now! About after 9/11, he went to the Pentagon. He was a general, went to the Pentagon, and he was shown papers that before 9/11, they had already drawn up plans to invade all the countries that they've been invading: Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya, Sudan. We're betting all those goddamn countries, Afghanistan. So this has nothing to do with what they tell you about. And so, yes, again, the United States, Israel, the irony is Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States are the world's biggest terrorists, have been for the last 40 years, and ain't nothing going to change that.
Jimmy Dore, a pleasure as always to talk with you. Host of the Jimmy Dore Show, comedian, raconteur, political analyst, razor sharp, and one day, I hope, the next president of the United States